Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on e-commerce. And what we hope to talk about today is some of the processes that we have in place for e-commerce, some practical examples on campaign optimization, and in our opinion, things that you could do right now to boost your sales. And our emphasis will be on the B2C segment as such. My name is Niranka, and I'm the CEO of Antira Solutions. I have nearly 2 decades experience in digital e-commerce and technology space. So I'll be sharing some of the processes that we've implemented at Antira and some of the methodologies we practice in campaign execution. Joining me is Varuni, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Spryng, which is part of the innovation initiative of MAS. And Varuni has the top to bottom experience in building sustainable e-commerce and managing large e-commerce operations. So thank you for joining us today, Varuni. And Varuni will be sharing her thoughts on better operationalizing I would say, back end of e-commerce. Also joining me is Naveen. Naveen is the COO of Antira, and he heads performance-based marketing initiatives. Naveen has worked with over 100 brands and has quite a few practical insights that he'll be sharing with us today. So I will just take a minute and give you a bit of a background of what we're hoping today. We're hoping to talk about today, and frankly, we would love to answer any questions that you may have. Please click on the Q&A button on Zoom if you like, and share your questions with us. We will be sharing this broadcast on our social media and YouTube channels as well. So if you don't have the time to join us for a full hour, it'll be online shortly after the end of this webinar. So what we are going to start off with is actually looking at the e-commerce space holistically and a process map framework as such that we have implemented when we engage with an e-commerce client, as well as a framework as such for you to use to audit your operations. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen right now. So excuse my messy desktop, but I'm sure that you're seeing slides now. So Antira is a creative data-driven performance agency. We've helped Sri Lankan brands generate over 10 billion rupees online and the pure B2C sales. And first off, what I'm going to focus on is a way to structure your e-commerce process and use this as a check and balances system to audit your readiness. So the 7 pillar framework is something that we've developed in-house with the understanding that e-commerce is not merely a website or a specific activity. E-commerce is a process and is driven by ecosystem as such. And the reason why we actually built this framework and use this as part of our auditing process when we engage with a new e-commerce customer is because we have seen e-commerce go wrong, and more often than not, where it goes wrong is not in any one specific activity, but it is these little areas that have really not been thought about or put together. So I'm going to give you a couple of practical examples using this framework. So I'm going to first talk about one stage which is part of our foundation pillar, and it is the transaction audit process as such. So most of you who currently have an e-commerce site or are getting into e-commerce, this is probably something you need to really keep in mind. If you are selling outside of Sri Lanka specifically, Sri Lanka is at times defined as a high-risk destination for credit card transactions. So you have a situation where some foreign credit cards might fail automatically on our internet payment gateways, right? So if I give you a local context, let's say you buy something online, you are more often than not going to get a call from your bank asking you to validate that purchase. So in a very similar situation, you do have a scenario where foreign cards might fail on your e-commerce store. So you've got everything right. You've got your campaign right. You've acquired that audience, and they're looking to buy your product. But where things went south is at the point of the transaction, the credit card got declined, right? So we look at each of these pieces, and if I give you a practical example, understand in this scenario, we have implemented in some of our engagements where at the transaction stage we've implemented multiple emails where we keep the internal teams aware that a transaction is about to be processed, and then we have set timers to understand whether the transaction has been processed and has returned accurately. So in one such scenario, the customer worked with us to implement a process where their customer care team would call all failed transactions due to a credit card getting declined or similar reason on the payment side of things, and they were actually able to convert about 48% of those transactions they had lost. That actually translated to about $20,000 to $25,000 a month in revenue that they were able to secure. So the reason why I'm actually talking about this is when we take an entire e-commerce operation, these are all the little pieces that come into play in driving your numbers, right? So the framework and why we've introduced this framework is to actually give you a structured process on how to audit each section of your e-commerce ecosystem and have a better understanding of areas that you could optimize. So you could find a more detailed description of the 7-pillar framework on our website. The second aspect that I'm going to talk about is use case driven marketing, and this is something that we advocate quite a bit. If I take a step back, when we look at digital channels, we broadly categorize them into three. The first is we look at direct marketing channels. What this means is that you have the ability to have a one-to-one conversation. So more often than not, this could be your loyalty base, your SMS base, those you could send an email through your mailing list. In a nutshell, those that you have some level of prior relationship with. The second channel that we looked at is called interest marketing. So this is more often than not what you do when you get onto platforms like Facebook and Google Display and all of that. You look at the 25 to 35-year-old males in Colombo, and you look at other interests. You basically try to narrow it down and create a bucket of potential individuals based on their interests and behaviors, and you are trying to position and promote your product to them. When it comes to intent-based marketing, this is where you have a bit of an idea of what your customer is thinking about. So when somebody goes on to Google and looks for, let's say, a hotel in Colombo, you have a clear understanding that they're looking for a hotel and they're looking for that in Colombo. If they type a luxury hotel in Colombo, then you understand the intent is defined a little better. You understand that they are looking for a luxury property within Colombo. So intent-based marketing is search is a fantastic example where you have a better idea of what the customer is thinking. So how that translates to this use case driven approach is when you are going to put your ad dollars and when you are going to start a conversation, understanding who you're going to go after with what message and what is the potential of converting that person, looking at the messaging, your landing page strategy, and the click funnels that you build within your website and online framework as such. So we've helped customers, we have one customer whose monthly revenue we actually increased by 30 million purely taking this approach. So I'm going to talk about how you create this buyer personas and use case based mapping. So I'm going to take an individual, for example, let's say a 30 something lady based in Colombo. She might be an employee, she might be a mom, she might be a friend, she might be married, fashion may be an area of interest for her. So this same individual would wear different hats at different times, and what their needs are based on those different scenarios might also differ. So if you are talking about the context of an employee, she may be looking at, let's take a fashion store as an example. So she might be looking at office wear, which is both casual, maybe formal wear for meetings, events, that sort of thing. If we take the scenario as, let's say, she's married, maybe she's shopping men's clothes for a special occasion, like it's her husband's birthday and she wants to buy something. So when we take this in the context of a business, one person might have multiple opportunities of engagement for us. And we may also, when we look at saying we've got $1,000 spent, who are we going to go after? We might also have a better idea of how valuable these different buyer personas, these use cases are for us at different times. So if I take the gifting scenario, she might actually be buying men's clothes only on a special occasion. So once a year or twice a year, birthday or anniversary, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the employee buyer persona, she might actually buy update her wardrobe every 3 months, maybe every 6 months. So there are different values and different opportunities within these use cases also. And the important thing is to kind of understand how these use cases are mapped to your services and offerings, and how as a business you would basically subscribe a certain value to each of these use cases. When it comes to mapping value drivers for your brand, these are basically the foundation that needs to be there in any of your e-commerce operations. So you must be able to um, create and establish trust. This is where the user would feel comfortable in purchasing on your site. The functionality, ease of use, the bragging rights, brand association. Look at what I got from this company. These are all things that are not maybe tangible at the start, but are significant value drivers for your e-commerce space. So I'm going to give you a practical example and offer some context into how this plays a role, right? And I'm going to talk about a recent ad that I was exposed to. So for those of you who have been to our office, you know that we've actually taken a residence and converted that into office. So what we have is 9 separate rooms which have been converted into office space. So I have my own room, and the first 30 minutes of my walking into office, I'm baking because each of these rooms have been individually air conditioned. So I have to come in, I put on my AC, sit down, and hope for the best. So when you take that specific need and whether that need is quantified, I'm going to talk about an ad I saw. So I saw uh, a smart remote for an air condition saying that you can connect your AC to your phone and on your AC, right? And I saw this ad and I was like, really, what would they think of next? Who would spend X amount of dollars buying a smart AC remote? And I actually didn't spend too much time looking at the product. I just saw the ad and I moved on from there. I saw this same product about 7 days later, but this time the ad and the message was specifically targeting the use case that I was focusing on at that very moment. So I saw an ad that said, walk into a cool room, ensure your AC is on 30 minutes prior to your arrival. That message immediately resonated with me because it spoke to the use case that I was looking at that very moment. So when it comes to an individual, and I'll talk a little about attention online as well. So when it comes to an individual, and when you are designing your campaigns and you're going to take that message out, you have so much, or you have very little attention. And what you are trying to first create is that first conversation. So, understanding how this audience can be segmented, what are their different use cases in the context of what might they be looking for now when they are wearing this particular hat, or when they fit into this particular persona, and as a brand, what is the ease of reach for that particular audience, and what is the value of that audience to the business, what is the potential of them repeat purchasing from us, what is the lifetime value. So this is also a process that we undertake whenever we get involved with an e-commerce project as such, to better understand who are we going to talk to, who is going to drive our ROI numbers, who has long-term value for the business, and how do we create that first impression. So this leads to our process of campaign planning. We call it the 3-7-60 rule. And it is about how we optimize brand touchpoints. So the whole conversation here is how do we translate a potential customer to an actual customer. So the 3-7-60 rule comes in the context of when you are first fighting for attention. And we focus and function on the basis that you have 3 seconds for your first possible impression. This is, they are on Facebook, they are scrolling through their news feed, and your brand ad has just appeared. And 3 seconds is the first impression, the amount of time we believe that you have to convince that customer to give you a little bit more attention. So that's actually how we look at it. How can we ask for more attention is actually what this structure is all about. So the first 3 seconds, if successful, might translate into 7 seconds. So what this means is they have clicked on your, and I've taken a website example here. They have clicked on your ad to come onto your website, and you have about 7 seconds to convince them to stay on your website. So this is actually what we refer to as the billboard effect. You're driving by on the road, you see a billboard out there, and pretty much that's the amount of attention that you can expect is where this theory comes from. And when it comes to a website as well, you have this relatively short space of time to positively influence them to actually spend more time. So that we take as the first 7 seconds. If you are successful in this process, it will lead to 60 seconds. This is where they are spending up to a minute on your landing page. More often than not, what we see in the Sri Lankan context is you have the F-type scan, that is people read from left to right. They look at like the headings and scroll down, and you have the Z-type scan, which is where they're crossing, zigzagging across the page. So that more often than not, what we see is a full scroll or a 50% to 75% scroll on that landing page to get that first impression. And then if there is something that speaks to them, they actually scroll up and down and start focusing on specific areas. So we have a lovely case study where one specific image more often than not translated into the reason why they decided to explore that brand a little bit further. So why we talk about this is, and why we actually use this as a campaign planning process is when we talk about our marketing initiatives, we break it down in this context and say 3 seconds, 7 seconds, 60 seconds, how do we gradually increase the attention span with our brand? And the longer the attention that we have, the higher likelihood we have of building a positive brand impression and building a higher affinity with that audience. So when we test our campaigns, this is also an approach that we use. And again, I have an example actually where we use 9 different images in our ads, and we were able to understand that 60% of the traffic that we got from that campaign within the first 7 days was actually from one particular image which seemed to resonate the best with that audience. So we take that understanding, then we create more variations, and we continuously test. So this may help you in planning your own campaigns, where you can look at the effectiveness of this process, not just the ad, but the first fold of your possibly website, your Instagram page, Facebook page, whatever that you are using as the main brand touch point, how effective you are in driving that conversation. So with this, I think something that we often see in the Sri Lankan context, and I know today's topic is mostly about driving sales this season, but I think this is quite important to keep in mind in the context of an overall e-commerce operation. Short-term and long-term objectives need to be mapped out. And more often than not, we find that short-term ROI objectives function as sometimes even a deterrent for long-term objectives. So you don't, if you're spending $10 now, you're wondering whether you're going to get $100, and that's perfectly fine. But if you spend that $20 and you are able to acquire $100 now, but you're also able to acquire a segment of customers who would buy from you repeatedly, that $100 without too much of an effort might become $200 or $300. Where the initial ROI might seem a little smaller, but in the context of lifetime value, in the context of 6 months of your operation or 1 year of your operation, you might actually have brought in customers that are important to your business. So when we look at lifecycle management, we have again a 7-step process here where we break it down into pre-sale and post-sale. In the pre-sale aspect of the conversation, what we are looking at is how do we create that first impression, and how could we potentially convert them on a use case. So although it's just 2 steps here, it's a massive amount of work. This is where a lot of your testing comes in, a lot of your ad campaigns, your ROI calculations, your promotions. Half of the 7-pillar framework I talked about at the beginning of this webinar actually comes in the pre-sale and sale aspect of it. But why we actually use this in our conversations is very often we find that the post-sale aspect of e-commerce is more often than not ignored. How do we bring somebody into our ecosystem? Maybe the first conversion ROI may not be all that great, but this person has so many different use case opportunities within our brand, right? So we've now uh, basically capitalized on their buyer behavior. They are part of our ecosystem. We can reach out to them on email. We have their contact details. And there is a certain level of brand affinity if they are a happy customer with their first purchase. How do we now try to upsell to them? How do we try to cross sell to them? What are the opportunities we have? And here an internal process that we follow is we segment customers into a tier structure, and we look at purchase behavior as well as value to the brand associated with each of those tiers. And we have a separate conversation on how do we upgrade customers from one tier to the next, right? And we have a very successful example in Australia, where we actually increased the basket size from almost like $24 to $70+, and the entire conversation was around how do we increase repeat sales, and if they like our products, how do we upgrade them to the next tier. If you like this, then you might love this. Why don't you try it out? Here's a free sample. Keeping them informed of new promotions through emails, drip campaigns, spot discounts. So these are some of the things that Naveen will, I think, touch on a little more in detail. And I have an example taking search for the dresses category. So as you can see, there is over 300,000 average monthly searches, 56% coming from Western Province in the dresses segment. Now, if you take the dresses segment, you can break it down further and further to see if there are better, I would say, connectivity with your brand. So, for example, you can see dresses are sort by occasion, where people are looking at wedding dresses, bridesmaid dresses, wedding guest dresses, etc. So if you are not in that segment, maybe this might not make sense to you at all. But if you look at the wedding segment, there is further granularity in there. So people are looking for beach wedding dresses, plus size wedding dresses, cheap wedding dresses. So these are all better opportunities for you to create a stronger connection with your customer. First, by the first impression you create, and second is when you get them onto your landing page, if you show them exactly what you're looking for, it is going to potentially translate into a better conversion rate of your campaign. So I have an example. I was privileged to do an audit for a large American clothing brand. They were doing, I think, about $10 to $12 million in sales online a month. And when we design e-commerce sites, there is this context that we keep in mind on search parameters. So most people use website search and the filters to find what they want. And in the web development process, we look at post method URLs. That is where you can actually copy paste that URL as it is and paste it somewhere else. It'll load with those filters. There are other ways to do it, obviously, but this is one of the easiest ways to do it. And with this brand, what they've done is they use the filters that they create. So they had predefined and built lovely landing pages for each of their main categories. But what they did was they used the filter method to do very specific targeting. So if somebody was looking for a red lace midi dress kind of thing, they were able to through the filters filter out and say there are 3 products available starting from this price. So through their advertising campaigns, they had over 3,600 different ad groups running across multiple different campaigns. It was fantastic because they have that level of granularity and their conversion ratio. So that particular search had only about 10 people maybe, but they actually had a decent conversion ratio from those long tails because they were bringing that emphasis. So when we talk about the first impression, the closer you are to matching what the customer has in their minds, the higher likelihood you would have in generating a quality visitor to potentially your website. So when it comes to social media, we talk about this as interruptions. People are on social media for anything but, frankly, to look at your ads. So how successful are you in interrupting their behavior to connect them with your brand message? And when it comes to platforms like search, how effective is your entry point strategy and your click funnels to get people in based on their specific intent and convert them on your website? So what I've talked about today is at a certain high level, some of the fundamentals that you should be doing. And we thought it's a good place to start because sometimes we tend to leave money on the table because of small optimization issues. You're spending $1,000, but you haven't really targeted properly, or your messaging has not been tested. And these may be reasons why you're not really driving the kind of numbers that you might have in mind. So that is why we've looked at these 3 specific frameworks and processes that we use at Antira, and hope it will be helpful for you in auditing your existing campaigns and potentially planning your future campaigns. So with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Varuni, who will talk a bit about managing the operational aspect, and Naveen will take over from there. Thank you. Varuni, over to you.
Thanks, Niranka. Let's wait for the screen share to end, Niranka.
Sure. There you go.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Varuni. And basically, so we're going to talk about managing seasonal chaos, which is what it usually is if you run an e-com operation, particularly during December. And to start off, basically, there are 3 things that I'm going to touch on today. One is customer service. There's inventory and inventory availability, fulfillment, and returns. Now, all of these things are around customer service and kind of how it improves the overall experience of the customer. But I will go into each of them and kind of will talk a bit about the ops aspects as well. Starting off with customer service, this does tie in to what Niranka was talking about earlier. The first thing in terms of offering great customer service is to first understand your customer's journey. And this is not necessarily from the brand's point of view, but also from the customer's point of view. Like, how do they interact with the brand? How do they see you? What is their emotion towards you? And kind of understand what their sentiment is. The next one is to understand their experience with you and how they view your service, your website's offering, but also the offering from your partners, say your courier providers, your warehousing, so on and so forth, if there is any engagement. The next one is to map out your customer's life cycle. Now, I Okay, my slide switch. Sorry about that. So the custom life cycle Niranka spoke about, so I'm not going to touch over that, but those are kind of the things that we need to consider in terms of making it to the customer's consideration list. Now, in order to make it to your consideration list, a couple of things that we need to look at is in terms of making your first few seconds count. Like, you get to the customer to the website, you drive the traffic, you pay for that click. Once they get there, how do you make the first couple of seconds count and make sure you have their attention? The next thing is to build trust. This is super important because particularly in Sri Lanka, people tend to not trust e-commerce websites, and they're like, oh, well, will I get my item? Will it come? Will the payment fail? Will it go through? So on and so forth. The next thing is user experience and your overall UX. That is essentially a breaking point. If your customer gets lost in there, they can't find what they want, they'll close the tab and they'll probably never come back. The next thing in terms of making it to the consideration list is to incentivize the first purchase. This is important also because say for example, if the customer is not familiar with your brand or they've not purchased from you before, they'll be a little bit uncertain and they'll be a little bit wary. And if that is the case, how do you kind of understand that behavior and offer them something that will incentivize them to buy? The next thing is to be proactive, understand your customer, see how they're kind of navigating through your website. What are the pages they're looking at? How much time are they spending? And you can use a lot of tools online to kind of do this so that you know exactly what's working for them and you are kind of ahead of what your customer is looking for. The next thing is in terms of an FAQ. This is super important because you don't want your customers kind of going all over the place looking for the information they want. It can be, say, for example, something as simple as a size chart. It can be information, say, for example, Niranka was talking about dresses, like how long is it? If I'm like a 5'5" or 5'6", will this fit me? Will it be long enough? Would it how would the returns work? How would shipping work? What are the costs associated, so on and so forth. Then, say, for example, if you're selling technical products, there are questions around warranties, how would replacements work, and so on. So just make sure you kind of take a step back and look at your product from the customer's point of view versus the brands and the business's point of view, and offer those solves up front so that you also use that as a method of building trust, and you keep the customer on your website and stay within the consideration list. The next thing is, now if the customer can't find the information, they'll typically write to you. And one of the things here is that we do like to automate a lot of our responses, particularly on Facebook and other social media as well. With email, you try and have a bit of automation here to make sure your responses are standardized. But it's also important to make sure that they are not just standardized, but also standardized in a way where it looks like it's customized, so that they kind of feel a little bit special and the customer feels that they're actually speaking to a person and not just somebody who's automatically responding to them. I can't, okay. Now you've made this a consideration list. Next, how do you get them to buy? So here, the main thing is you need to answer all their questions, provide a solution for them before they leave the website, because once they leave, it's going to be much harder for you to bring them back. It's also costly. You'll have to focus on things like remarketing and other tactics, and also give them a reason to try you. Thereafter, you look at smooth checkout processes and also minimize distractions. So like Niranka was saying earlier, one of the things with Sri Lanka in particular is that because you do have a couple of issues around payment gateways, if you want to make it smooth, people do offer cash on delivery. That is seemingly a much preferred option for some reason in Sri Lanka for shoppers. So if that is the case, how do you kind of meet those requirements and make the experience itself pretty simple, where they just have to enter the address, put their phone number in, and they do the payment, and they basically leave your website. This other thing, from there we move on to shipping and returns. So now they've purchased your product. The next thing is what happens after they buy. Here, the post-purchase and retention piece comes not just from their online shopping experience per se, but how do you make delivery amazing for your customers? So for example, you can do like a personalized note, or you do, for example, Christmas packaging, or something special that kind of makes the delivery experience itself amazing. The next thing is to ask for feedback at the right time so that so the customer is aware that you're constantly in touch with them. Say, for example, if they receive the goods today, you give them a couple of days to use it, and then you can reach out and ask them, okay, look, we know you received the products. What is your feedback on it? Has it met your expectations? Could you give us some input on it? This is, I mean, it is not one of those things that you actually have to do where a person calls the customer, but you can automate all these things so that you can actually get the customer's feedback and kind of collate it, but not just collate it, but also use that feedback to improve your service offering. Say, for example, if the customer had an issue with the courier, but was the delivery on time? Did it happen the way in a convenient manner? How can you take that feedback to improve the overall experience, not just your product? The next thing is to keep your customer engaged and also to offer periodic surprises. So say, for instance, you can use the feedback on your social media. You can use them as ambassadors where they will share your content, but also share their experience on social media so that they kind of continuously engage with the brand and feel like they're part of it. Okay, from there, we move on to inventory. So again, it kind of ties in a little bit to the last piece of retaining the customer. Here, one of the most important things and a very, very practical requirement is kind of to prep for the holiday rush. Because say, for example, you're going into December and you're expecting to spend, say, for instance, you would typically spend a lot more money during the Christmas period in order to get more traffic to your website. What happens if you don't have what the customer wants? So in order to avoid those situations, the first thing you need to do is to do a pre-season stock take. Make sure you have your inventory in place. And if you have, say, for example, in-store plus online experiences, you should look at a method of having seamless inventory across channels so that it's very easy for you to manage your inventory. But also, say, for example, if you have a customer who's bought something online and wants to exchange it in store, they have that option. Or you don't have inventory online, you can still pull it across from one of your stores and then sell it to the customer who's bought it online. But this requires agile operations, and it kind of needs you to be a little bit more flexible on how you treat stock and how you kind of get those approvals up front. The next thing is to plan your order volumes based on your spend, your traffic, and your historic data. Generally, you can work with your agency to kind of understand what the ideal spend should be and what your estimated traffic is. Make sure your website is able to handle that load, because you don't want people kind of coming to the website at the same time and having to actually wait to log in. The next thing is to make sure that you have your suppliers kind of prepped up front so that they are aware that you're running a sale. If you need additional inventory, how do you get it in fast? You make it flexible so that people kind of can work on the fly and make decisions much easier. And essentially prep for best case sales, because one of the things you don't want to do is to not have stock and basically call a customer up and say, look, we're sorry, we have to cancel your order. We have no way of sending it. And this has personally happened to me on Uber as well. Like even on Uber Eats, I buy stuff and then the store will call up and say, look, we have to cancel your order because it's not available. And that's not a great experience, particularly because you're making the payment up front. Last point is on fulfillment and returns. And here, this is essentially how do you create post-purchase happiness? The first thing is we do need to set up SOPs, because for, say, for example, for customer service teams, for warehousing teams, for logistics teams, how do I go back? Okay, sorry. For logistics teams, it makes it so much easier if they have the process up front and they know exactly what to do. So you kind of do need to take a step back, think about the scenario and plan for it so that everyone is fully informed. The next thing is if, for example, you're having a massive delay and your warehousing partner or your courier is unable to deliver something to your customer on time, keep them informed, let them know so that they don't kind of have to wait for a surprise where 5 days down the line you have to tell them, oh, look, your order is not ready, or we can't send it on time, or we need like extra time or so on. So just be upfront with the customers, they'll really appreciate it. Next thing is on staff planning and volume management. Here, again, this is more for yourself. While you do need to also inform your warehouses so that they can plan for staff, does your operation need extra staff? Say for customer service, do you need extra people? Do you need to get some additional resources trained up to help with the load. That's something you need to plan for. The next thing is in terms of coordinating your logistics and your warehouses, so that if there is any cost, and say for example you need to do overtime or you have to get additional resourcing, you have those approvals up front so that your operation is not hindered and it kind of comes to a situation where it's a massive crunch. So those are some of the basic things that you need to look at. The most important thing is plan for best case sales, so that all your cards are basically laid out and you have everything ready to go when the rush hits in. So that's it from me, and I'll give it over to Naveen.
Right. Thanks, Varuni. And I think that was a quite interesting insight, particularly from a client's perspective. I think we've seen this when we run campaigns where, you make the sale, you drive the visitors to the site, and then you have a bad customer experience, and then there's a bad brand impression also. So I think the understanding the customer satisfaction side, the whole logistics part, managing that expectation from a, I think, client's perspective was quite insightful in the operation. So thank you so much, Varuni, on that. So I want to take the last leg of the presentation and sort of talk about e-commerce in a more implementational manner. Pretty much from a tactical point of view, what can we do? In the immediate future, what can you do in terms of the different channels you have, etc. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Right. So before we get into a few use cases, I want to sort of quickly run through the user journeys. I think we've been talking about customer journeys, user journeys quite a bit, but the understanding that you have about how a customer makes a purchase will really allow you to plan your execution as well from a digital marketing point of view. So this is something I think every one of us is familiar with, the user funnel. We've just added maybe an extra step, which is pretty much the brand discovery, someone getting to know the brand for the first time, or someone who has heard of you and who has interacted with you with your brand can be another one. So brand discovery. So a typical user journey happens is they first get to know the brand, then they interact with the brand, and then they convert. So they make a purchase, and then they keep being your customer throughout. So this journey can be as short as a one day, or it can be as long as a couple of months or a year. So depending on the product you sell, the industry that you are in, this user journey can be, a long process or a short process. So for example, if it's an FMCG brand that you're handling, with a very short lifespan, then people will be purchasing, going through this cycle much faster. But if you're in, let's say, for example, automobile industries or electronics, or some other kind of industry, this decision-making process can take a longer period. So the reason why we wanted to bring this in is because at any given point, you will have customers at different stages of this life cycle with you, right? There will be customers who have not heard about you, who might have just seen an ad that you have done. There can be people who are, at this given point of time, who have visited your website, maybe browsed through your website and the products. There can be people who have already bought from you, and there are people who keep buying from you also. So that means that your marketing campaign shouldn't be like a cookie cutter solution. It has to have a dynamic solution for each of these stages. So that is why when it comes to like a implementation strategy, you have to sort of look at how your different channels fits in at each of these stages. So this is an example of how we would map out a campaign for a client. So depending on the journey, we will decide what channels to use. We will decide what kind of advertising message to be used. and we will also decide the audience. So for example, we all know that when it comes to digital marketing, you have multiple ways of conducting it. You have different channels. So if I were to take paid advertising, so paid advertising will include Facebook advertising, it will include Google ads, it might include Twitter, all the social medias and, direct placements on website, etc. But also when it comes to these different platforms, that the conversion rates of these platforms can differ based on your targeting and the budgets you use. So for example, at the brand discovery stage, we don't expect the customer to immediately go and buy. The objective at that point is to introduce the brand and for the customer to maybe have a look at what you have to say and to consider your message, right? So in an example, someone might be browsing a website and they might see a display ad with a nice image and saying 20% off Black Friday or Cyber Monday sale with the product name and the price. So that consideration will make seeing that ad will make the user to decide, okay, I want to click on it or not. So they might click on it and then they will come to your website. So that is the brand discovery part. And at the customer acquisition, I don't want to go into the details of setting up the campaigns, but I want to maybe explain a bit on the thinking. So at the customer acquisition stage, for example, we know that we can look at campaigns like generic search campaigns where we target specific keywords, where we know that the person is actively looking for this kind of a product or a service. So for example, if someone is looking for 32-inch TV without mentioning a brand name, you can possibly run a Google search ad and drive that visitor to that particular product page. So that is a position where you have brought in a visitor who has a direct intent of maybe buying, maybe considering buying a product, a TV, but we don't really know whether they will buy or not. I mean, they might have multiple considerations, the price, the service that you have, and I think linking back to what Varun mentioned, like the website's landing page, the content that you showcase, all of that will influence that decision. And then conversion stage is pretty much where you are quite, I would say, confident of converting the customer. So with that objective in mind, you need to look at your campaigns also in a certain different way. So for example, people who are actively looking for your brand online shows that they have an intent to find your brand and your website. So, running a brand search campaign is focusing on conversions. People who have come to your website, interacted a lot of times, looked at the product, the price, the time, spent enough time, like let's say 2-3 minutes, maybe even added some of the products to their cart, but haven't bought. They have shown a very high intention of buying. So we can maybe run a remarketing campaign for those guys, just for that audience, maybe with a secret coupon code or a special discount, something like that. Retention is pretty much a very important area when it comes to e-commerce and in any industry. Is a person who has bought from you, who now knows your e-commerce process, the product range you have. Keeping them satisfied continuously will ensure that you get a larger or longer lifetime value from that customer at a very lower cost. So having a continuous engagement, a conversation with your existing base of customers is very important. We'll talk a bit about some of the tactics we can use also. So one of the examples here, the rewards and loyalty programs, which which goes without saying, is that it encourages the person to increasing, repeatedly buy. So this is in a very nutshell. I mean, I haven't gone into the details of explaining each campaign. I think we are also pressed for time a bit. But when you set up your campaigns, always look at the different stages and have different objectives for your different campaigns, and your channels should be utilized in that same manner. So secondly, I wanted to sort of, since we talked about accelerating e-commerce in the short term, and I think Niranka also touched a bit on this about your objectives. So what can you achieve in the short term, and what are the things that will have a longer effort to achieve? So if you look at the two examples, boxing and marathon, at the end of the day, you are there to win, and it just takes more time, right? So what are the things that you can implement? So I want to really quickly go through some areas which we have seen tremendous growth and really significant improvements for some of our clients. So audience segmentations and automation of your customer base. I think in the Sri Lankan context, there's a lot of brands who are in the e-commerce industry, but who haven't really put serious thoughts into their existing customer base and how they can segment it. So if you're a brand that is like just getting into e-commerce, then this is, you have to start from scratch, where you have to start building your audience. But if you're a brand that, has had a certain amount of existence, like you have operated for some time, this is something you can, get started immediately. So your existing base of customers, depending on their purchase history, you can sort of segment these guys into different areas. So the purchase frequency based on the average basket size, have they bought sometime recently with you, or have they, are they buying repeatedly? What is the value they have bought? So the reason is that something we have seen a lot of engagement is, I think, is the personalization aspect. So your customers, without treating them as, or every single customer to be the same, you will have the guys who are most loyal to you, who are keep buying for you, your brand advocates, encouraging them to purchase more, or encouraging them by incentivizing them by giving them something special, can really make an impact on your revenue as well. So especially during the seasonal offers, one of the things we would suggest is, if you are able to segment your customers, look at maybe sending out a special offer or a special coupon code to the people who have bought more from you. Or you can do it the other way as well. You look at the guys who have bought from you maybe long time back, but haven't really bought from you. You can send them an email, for example, saying, we haven't seen you in a while at our shop. Here's a 10% off on your next purchase. Use this coupon code. So segmenting the audiences differently will really allow you to have a quick win. And email marketing is something that we need to sort of, in the Sri Lankan environment, really start focusing a lot more, in my opinion. So that is how you segment the audience. Obviously, when the way you should build your audience, you can use multiple methods to do that. When someone buys your product, they give their email, and the contact details can be used as a source as to build that audience. You can use website pop-ups. You can have in-store promotions, like you have a physical store, you ask them to sign up for the newsletter. There's a lot of ways you can capture that audience. So this is, in my opinion, is a great way to really fast track some of the sales that you want to drive this month. And it is an area where you can directly address the customer as well. So audience segmentation and driving impulse decisions, I think what Varuni and Niranka spoke about it. So I just wanted to talk about a very quick and practical example. So what you mean by driving impulse decisions is a customer that is now on your site, who has shown potential to purchase, but is really on the borderline. So for example, if I give you a scenario, someone comes to your website, looks at your product page, spends about 2-3 minutes going through that page, really looking at that product, but in the end he goes to exit the page. Takes his cursor to the cross icon on the browser. So at that point you can trigger what we call an exit intent pop-up. So what that means is, using a pop-up platform, you can initiate an action where someone is trying to exit the page. You can show them a special message. So spot discounts on exit intent is a great way to drive an impulsive decision. We have seen this with one of our biggest e-commerce clients we've had, where in one day we've generated, I think, about 200% increase in the sales for a particular TV product. And the same thing, I think Varuni also mentioned, how you can increase the person to buy by introducing first time purchase incentives, and also limited time flash sales. So what you mean by that is pretty straightforward. You create a hype using your messaging, your email marketing, and your campaigns to say, okay, for a limited time of period, let's say this Saturday, we are giving you free shipping. So that driving that message to make it seem like a very strong offer is something you can really do in the short term and experiment and see. Again, something that we are quite fond of is talking about drip campaigns, drive home your message. Drip campaigns in the context of newsletters has been there for some time, and I think that is also something in the Sri Lankan e-commerce aspect we need to really focus on. The point I want to talk about here is not particularly on newsletters, but on advertising, where I think we are all familiar with advertising based on interest based, and the demographics, etc. But we are also familiar with remarketing, I would say. So you go to a website, you consume some content on that page, and you start seeing ads following you, right? So how can you make it more engaging is what we try to address by the drip campaign. So I want to maybe take you guys to that first example which Niranka mentioned when about the AC story. So I think one of the ways you can keep the audience engaged with your messaging is that without showing them the same ad repeatedly, you A/B test and you trial out different advertisements based on their engagement on your ad. So let's say, for example, you are promoting a TV or an FMCG product. So your first ad is going to be a video, a 15-second video that talks about the product in detail. Based on the campaign you have run and the audience you have done, you can target the people who have engaged with that video with another ad. So you segment that to say, okay, those who watched the first ad fully will see this secondary carousel ad or on Facebook, which talks about the value propositions. Those who didn't watch the ad, they only, after 3 seconds, they dropped off the ad, are going to see a different message, which is going to make them watch again, something more compelling than the video. So by using drip campaigns in your advertising, you can try to keep your audience engaged by telling them different stories. So this is really good when you're trialing out your marketing campaign and when you know that the person has interacted with your brand and over, but your messaging changes to make them purchase somehow, so that is something you should trial out. So drip campaigns can be set up, by using custom audiences, let's say on Facebook or on Google Ads or even YouTube ads. Lastly, but not one of the things that I want to talk about is the organic growth that you can bring to your brand using, primarily SEO and content marketing. So this is the marathon I was talking about. It might be maybe too short for you to implement immediately for December season, but if you're looking at the long haul, SEO is very important. So understanding how people are looking for your brand in detail. For example, if you're selling a vehicle, if you're selling an electronics product, if you're selling a toy, if you're into retail, understanding the search volumes for your different brands and understanding where your website ranks when someone does a simple Google search will give you a very good insight on how you can drive free traffic to your site in the long term. So some of the examples are also given here. We've seen tremendous success in most of our e-commerce and even non-e-commerce clients with a very strong SEO strategy. So what we do there is to make sure that the customer is able to discover your brand primarily through the product that you sell, but also by indirect searches. So that is what I wanted to highlight by when we say, driving visibility as a thought leader or a content creator. So you own a brand, but you also drive the conversations around it. One example is that is how you can use your blog to talk about a certain topic that is related to the product that you sell. For example, you might be selling a tea product. So there are people who are talking about, not particularly trying to buy the tea product, but they want to know more about that product. So they want to know about the benefits of tea. You can write an article on that and publish that on your website, which will, let the people discover your site by actually, coming across the blog that you have published. Website, auditing a website to make sure that your website follows, the SEO standards, and reviewing your current performance in Google, and then positioning yourself as a thought leader or a content creator in that segment is going to have a long-term effect on your campaign. So those were some quick suggestions. I think I'm going to probably hand over to Niranka from here. So any questions we can take up as well. So these are the 4 main areas. Obviously, there's a ton of things you can do in terms of optimizing your campaigns, improving your cost per clicks, all of that. I think we can touch base on that as well if there's some time for us. Over to you, Niranka.
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you, Varuni, for sharing your insights today. We hope it's been a session where you've at least had 1 or 2 takeaways that you could take back and implement today itself with the hopes of optimizing your campaigns. So we are going to sign off. Thanks to everyone who's joined us, and please feel free to email any questions you might have, or just drop us a line on our website chat, Facebook.
And I think we will. I think we will publish the webinar also on our social media. I think
yes. So on Facebook and YouTube, this webinar will be published during the course of the day. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Niranka.
Cheers.
Have a good day.